and welcome to another episode of The Word for Kids. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Josh.
And we're guiding you through the book of Matthew in a series of 20 episodes. Last time, we learned about the end of John the Baptist's life. He had made Herod angry by opposing his marriage to Herodias, and as a result was put in jail. But at Herod's birthday party, he was so happy with his wife's daughter that he promised to give her whatever she wanted. And being prompted by her mother, she asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter, which is exactly what she got.
When John's disciples told Jesus about John's death, he went away on a boat by himself. But when he landed, there was a large crowd, and he took the time to heal their sick. The disciples wanted Jesus to send away the crowd so that they could get themselves some dinner. But Jesus, he had other plans. There were 5,000 men there, plus women and children, and the disciples had only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Jesus took them, gave thanks, broke the bread. Miraculously, the thousands of people there all ate until they were full. And then the disciples collected 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over.
Jesus sent the disciples ahead of him in the boat, and he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When Jesus went to join them, the boat was way out in the water, so Jesus started walking toward them on top of the water. The disciples were terrified, thinking there was a ghost, but Jesus told them not to be afraid. Peter said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus did so, and Peter started walking on the water. But when he saw how crazy the wind was, he got really scared and began to sink. He yelled, "Lord, save me!" And Jesus reached out his hand and caught Peter. And that's where we left off last time. Are you ready for today's adventure? Let's go!
Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus didn't say anything, so his disciples told him to send her away. Jesus said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel."
Let me take a minute to explain something. The Israelites were the people chosen by God in the Old Testament, the promised descendants of Abraham, those Moses had led out of slavery in Egypt. In the New Testament, the descendants of the Israelites are usually called Jews, and everyone else who is not a Jew is called a Gentile. So this woman from Canaan was not a Jew, she was a Gentile. And when Jesus said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel," he was talking about his calling to the Jewish people. The woman kept calling out, "Help me!" Her constant calling out to him and the fact that she was a Gentile and not a Jew are likely why the disciples had already asked Jesus to send her away. While he did not send her away, he did at first refuse to heal the woman's daughter, since she was not Jewish.
What Jesus said next may sound harsh, but ultimately he gave her an opportunity to demonstrate her faith. He said, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." But she replied, "Yes, it is, Lord. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." What she meant was that even though she knew Jesus was sent to the Jews first, she also believed that Jesus' power was more than enough to help the Gentiles too. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. The woman did show a tremendous amount of faith and boldness, which caused Jesus to have compassion on her. It was this faith that ultimately made all the difference for her daughter.
Sometime later, Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or another prophet." Jesus asked, "But what about you? Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." It's important to note that the word Peter in Greek actually means rock. This was a great honor given to Simon Peter.
Jesus then ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. He went on to explain to them that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly at the hand of the Jewish leaders, that he must be killed, and on the third day raised to life. Peter took Jesus aside and said, "This shall never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely of human beings." Whoa. This is the same Peter that Jesus had just said was the rock he would build his church on, and he now calls him Satan? Jesus was going to challenge what people expected from a Messiah, and this was only the beginning. Peter, like nearly everyone else who had been waiting on this Messiah, did not believe that the Messiah would suffer, die. When Jesus said, "Get behind me," he was telling Peter and the rest of his disciples to follow him and to let him be the leader, even if that led to suffering. He said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Forfeit means to give up.
After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up on a mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. Let's pause right there for today's word of the day.
Hello again, Eugene here with another word of the day. Today's word is transfigure. To transfigure is to change completely from one thing to a whole other thing. Transfigure.
As Jesus was transfigured, his face shone like the sun, his clothes became as white as the light. And just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Moses and Elijah, they're both important figures from the Old Testament who had not walked the earth in many years. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters." While he was speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down on the ground, terrified. But Jesus came, touched them, and said, "Get up, do not be afraid." When they looked up, they didn't see anyone else except Jesus. As they came down the mountain, Jesus told them, "Don't tell anyone what you've seen, not until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And that is where our story ends for today. It's time for the verse to remember.
Today's verse is Matthew 16:16. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Matthew 16:16. Something that really stood out to me was what Jesus required of his followers when he said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Jesus was telling them that they would face great suffering if they followed him. But in order for them to follow, Jesus had to lead the way. And Jesus led the way for all of us to follow him every day now, even 2,000 years later. Just like he went before the disciples, he goes before us in whatever suffering we face in our lives. So even though following Jesus isn't easy, it does mean that we'll never be alone.
One of the things that stood out to me from these chapters was the story about the Canaanite woman. You see, this story really resonated with me because, like that woman, I'm a Gentile. I might not be a son of Abraham, but I am a son of God, and Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And so just like that woman, I've placed my faith in Jesus. I trust that he wants what's best for me, that he can save me from my sin and from my suffering. And it's amazing that Jesus showed grace and mercy to that woman who was a stranger, because just like her, I was once a stranger to God.
All right, well, that's all we have for this episode. We're looking forward to seeing you again very soon for another episode of The Word for Kids.